Hello and welcome to the show. This is Everything Under the Sun. My name is Ty. Hope all you're doing amazing out there and taking care of yourselves the best you know how to. As I mentioned last week, the episode for this week is going to be death, and I'm sure you can see that by the title as well. But, I kind of wanted to go a different direction with this idea of death. As I mentioned in the last episode, there are a lot of beliefs that believe death is just a transition into another life, and there are many cultures around the world that still, and, years ago have adopted this idea of the people that have laid down the body, their souls continue on and they go on into this new realm of existence. And although there are many people that believe so many different things about death, and I have my own beliefs about death as well, but I wanted to kind of take this conversation in a different direction just because of that fact that so many people believe so many different things. I think that there's so much to this conversation of death that we just haven't had. We haven't had this conversation of death, and it's something that's so important because it's something that's part of all of our lives. And many times, as I've mentioned in the episode about transitions, we don't have to experience the laying down of the body in order to experience death of something. And of course, that's a little more symbolic death, but even that is still very important. But with that being the episode for this week, I'm going to speak about that in a little bit more. But with that being the episode for this week, I have this bag of topics that are full of just all the topics that all of you are sending in. Thank you so much for everything that you guys are sending in. I love communicating with all of you and just hearing your thoughts and ideas about everything that's coming up. I mean, these are the conversations that are so important to have, and I'm so thankful to have all of you to be having these conversations with. So thank you for that. If you have any thoughts or ideas or anything that you'd like to share, you can send those to everything.sunpodcast@gmail.com or any of the social media pages that I will link at the end of this episode. So yeah, as I was saying, I've got this bag here and I'm just going to shake it up a little bit and pull out a topic for next week. And yeah, again, I love each and every one of these topics. I know that it's kind of few and far between that I'm actually doing topics out of the bag, but they are still very much important, and I'm so thankful for all of them. So let's see. The topic for next week or some week down the line is going to be beauty. And, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and I think that I'm sure I'll say that when I speak about this topic, but beauty is something that exists, everywhere. It's really just, it's not just the idea of beauty within another human form, but the beauty that exists just in life, the beauty that's within certain ideas or certain phrases or certain languages, or there's just so much that is held within the idea of beauty. And I think that that's an amazing topic. So thank you so much. Again, everything.sunpodcast@gmail.com if you have any thoughts, ideas, or topics that you love to share, and I would love to hear them. So thank you so much for that. So as for this episode on death, as I mentioned, there are so many different ideas and beliefs around death, and no matter what people believe, there's always the saddening that happens. I mean, even in the cultures that celebrate death and the laying down of the body and how it's a transition to another life, there is still that sadness of the longing for the individual right there in this physical form. And of course, that's something that no matter how much you feel or know that there is a connection outside of that and a connection that will always exist, there is still some sadness that occurs. And I'd really like this conversation to be something that speaks more about how to have that conversation, how to start creating this conversation so that we can normalize this very normal thing of death. Because it's happening all the time, yet there are traumas and people experiencing so much pain and hurt because of this longing and this truth of this inevitability. And it can be very hard and it can weigh very heavy on any individual that experiences it. So kind of having this conversation, and it's important to recognize that sadness is something that is experienced. That as we have these conversations, we can't necessarily force our beliefs on someone else or even tell them that it's going to, like they're going to get over it, or it's going to kind of subside, or that it's just normal. Like there's a sense of connection and empathy that we have to have when we're having these conversations. And I think, having the conversations before the actual event occurs is something that's so important. Like having these conversations with kids, having this conversation as part of like a school curriculum where we can start to normalize what it means to make this transition. I mean, just like being born into the world, there is this ambiguity about, like where does the soul come from? Where does this consciousness come from? Where does, ourselves as beings come from that's outside of this physical form. I mean, you know, the body is constantly changing, and I think that there's that understanding that despite how the body changes, despite the form that the body begins to take on, we are still who we are. And I think that as we build on that realization that all of us are individuals and all of us have the different things that we've possessed in our lives from this, ambiguous space of just being born into the world, there is also that huge aspect of leaving this body and laying it down, and the things that come after that. And having those type of conversations where we can explore what different people believe, and really acknowledging the beliefs that other people have, and also realizing that sometimes people believe certain things because it's easier to accept them in the way that they believe it. So in having these conversations, it's so important to kind of have that empathy as we approach these conversations. Other people sitting across from you that are discussing this with you may not believe in the same things that you believe in. And that's why I wanted to kind of do this about just having that conversation and not necessarily speaking about my views on death, or what I believe death to be, or that process to be like, because the conversation is what's more important. The connectedness that we have with one another during that time and even before that time is something that's so critical, and just allowing us to be okay and be prepared for when that happens. A lot of these cultures, as I mentioned before, that celebrated death as a passing into a new dimension of life, a lot of those cultures, like the children that were raised in those cultures, had those beliefs and those conversations and those type of realizations at such a young age. So when it came time for them to experience that more and more with the people around them, as we grow older, our friends start to pass away, our loved ones and grandparents, and just it's starting to be more present in our lives. But by that time, in those conversations, in those cultures where they're embracing that, they have a lot more time to adapt to that. So when they do experience it in their life, they can be in that state of celebration, and maybe tears are shed, but at the end of the day, there's that lightness of the heart, there's a lightness of the body, there's that not holding on to the pain of what that separation feels like. And it's because of these conversations that are being had. It's because of the normalization of that in that culture and in that environment, in that community. And we can build that community with one another as we start having these conversations more. I mean, it's something so important, but even if you believe that life is just a transition to another dimension, or, just a shift into nothing, there's that realization that we have to have that this person sitting across from us that we're speaking to and having this conversation about death with may not believe the same things we believe. And it doesn't take away from the fact that we're all human and that we all want love and compassion. And it's really not the words that are being said. It's not the proving who's right and who's wrong about this. It's having compassion, having love. And even before the person is leaving us, or even before we experience that loss, we can start to have those emotions and express that security with one another. Saying, this is what I believe in death, and this is what you believe in death, and no matter what, as we experience this, as we go through this, I will be here for you. I'm always going to be here for you. I will give you love, and I will give you compassion. I will listen if you need someone to speak to. Oftentimes, feelings of loss and abandonment, or feeling alone, start to come up as we experience these losses. And it's so important for us to reiterate that we are never alone, and that we are never in this by ourselves. And so often that's not something that's felt, because people will lose individuals that they've been so close to and so intimately close to all their lives, and maybe they're the only people that they associate with so often. And to reach out to other people in this time of need, it can feel very difficult to do that, especially just trying to keep your head up through all of it. So in this time, I mean, even before that time that we experience that, we can reassure one another that we're always with one another, that we are always there to love one another, that we are there to listen to each other, and that no matter what, if we need something, we can reach out. These conversations about death, I mean, we can speak about, like the different ideas around like what happens after it, but it's really about how are we going to move forward and take the next step in life after this experience happens. Because even in those cultures where people are experiencing a loss, but they say that it's transition into another life, there is still an absence of that person's physical presence in that community. Maybe that person was a medicine person, or maybe that person was, a guidance counselor, or maybe that person was, just someone that played a specific role. And every time that anyone goes into that space, or goes to that place, or goes to that house, or sees pictures, they're going to remember that person being in that space. So there's always going to be that feeling of, again, absence in some kind of way, as many people experience this transition of death and the laying down of the body. But again, as we kind of realize that this is the basis of what many people are going to feel in this time, having these conversations that aren't just around the context of what death is, but how are we going to come together and still move forward and thrive in our lives as we're meant to. Love in itself is something that's so powerful, and it can heal all things. And as we have experienced life and experienced the love and compassion that has healed us in many different ways, whether it's the healing of a hug from a friend when we're feeling down, or the love of a compassionate ear for someone to listen to us. There's love that is expressed in so many different ways, and we can give that in these times, and even having these conversations where they're conversations of compassion, they're conversations of unity and oneness and community, because communities are what help us to move into different directions. Communities help us to get out of dark places. Communities help us to build relationships that are so substantial that if we do go through something so traumatic as a loss, we know that there are other people that we can turn to and that will be there for us. Again, those feelings of loneliness and loss and abandonment, these are things that are very deep rooted in many ways. Many people have felt this throughout their life, and as they experience the loss of someone that they felt close to, maybe the only person that they felt close to in the world, it says so much about just what meaningful relationships really do for us in our lives. And if we can start building community with one another and loving one another right here for who we are before, there is a laying down of the body, and there's the, oh, I wish I would have said these things to this person. I wish I would have, done this. I wish I would have done that. Instead of finding ourselves in those situations, we can start to have these conversations and express that love that will always be there. Even as parents speaking to their children, I mean, that is such a significant loss, like to lose a parent, for a child to lose a parent, or a parent to lose a child. And having those conversations just with your own family is something that's so important and so critical, because that is something that is an inevitability. And as we have these conversations, we can start to spend more time and intentionality with one another right now in this moment, where we can express the things that we want to express and say the things that we want to say, and feel free to do so. And this really ties into a lot of just things that we experience in our own lives. I mean, there's so many things that we hold on to for fear of how other people are going to accept us, or how other people are going to react, or just not saying words because of feeling like it's going to upset someone. I mean, even having the conversation of death is something that can be very upsetting. I know that I've spoken about my death to my mother, and I think it was a very uncomfortable conversation for her to have, just to think about losing a child. But, at the end of the day, these conversations are something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. It doesn't matter what age you are, and that just shows how little it's been taught, or how little it's been spoken about in our community as of now. And with that shadow being there, we kind of don't think about it, and then death kind of just happens. And then we find ourselves in those situations where we're asking ourselves, could I have said something else? I would have liked to let, this family member know about this, or I would have liked to let them know I loved them, or, it's like there are things that we may feel as though we're not able to say to this other person because they're now gone. But it's our fear and our doubts and our worries that have kept us from doing that, in this life right now, as they're still here. And also just the procrastination, the feeling as though life will continue. Not having that conversation leaves this idea of death as this ambiguous thing. We don't speak about the inevitability of death, even though we all know that it is inevitable. So as we have those conversations more, we can start to really be more true to ourselves with all of those around us, because we know how, how random life is. It can end at any moment as far as just our life in this physical world, and that is something that can just bring so much value to just being true to yourself and feeling free to speak your truth to anyone and everyone around you, whether that's telling the people around you how much you love them and how much they've impacted your life, and how they will always hold a special place in your heart. And there are just things that we can say, words that we can say, things that we feel as though we can express at any time, but again, we don't know when that time is up for us in this world. So having those conversations now, being more true to ourselves, and this is really a process of working on ourselves as we're constantly doing, and expressing that work that we've done to others around us. Building a community based on the conversations that we're having, based on the truth of our being, and being able to be more intentional with our relationships and our words and our hugs and our compassion, our love, and really just verbalizing that and showing that and expressing that in every moment as we kind of have this conversation about death, or just any conversation in life. It's really just so important. And how much more fulfilling can life be than to be as free as you can with all of those around you that you love and care about, with them expressing themselves in their full true selves as well. We can live a more true and harmonious lives within ourselves and within the world around us as we start to just recognize and have this conversation about death more. It's like these deep conversations, these heavy conversations, they can have so much compassion and understanding and just truth brought upon us just by having them. And even that is something just so miraculous, even outside of just helping to dampen the pain felt when that event occurs. We can live a more fulfilling life right now in this moment because of the truths that we begin to express with those around us. Because of these conversations about death, there is a softening that happens. When speaking about this conversation of death, there is a very soft energy that comes up. And it's usually at the base of, like after you get past the anxiety, after you get past the worry and the fear that comes up, that kind of dense energy that comes up when the conversation gets brought up. After it's actually in the full flow of a conversation that people are being real with one another, there's a softness, there's an openness, there's an openness that's very present. And in that openness, that in itself, that feeling is something so amazing, where you feel recognized and you feel heard and you feel as though there's an attention that's there, because this other person is recognizing that I'm having this conversation about death with someone that is going to die. I mean, think about that as we have these conversations. Even if you're having a conversation with your kid, I'm having a conversation with someone that's going to die. And whether I pass on before they do, or vice versa, it's like this is something that is going to happen. So as we kind of open ourselves up and open that and allow that softness and that compassionate to be present in the room, all sorts of things can come up from within us and within that conversation. So yeah, this episode was really, I think there's going to be a part 2 of death, where I do speak more about just the different conceptions of death and what that passing on means. But I feel as though just opening up what it means to have these conversations and how we can engage with them. And just because I said these words doesn't mean that's how you have to have these conversations. Every family is different, every relationship is different, every community is different. So it's up to us to have that conversation as best we know how to, and with the words that feel the best within that setting. I mean, how you're going to speak to your children, right? Or your family members or the people that are close to you. I mean, some of these conversations are difficult to have, so have it at your own pace. And, even just introducing the topic, saying like, what do you think about death? Or is it okay that we have this conversation about death? It's something that if you feel as though it's something that's weighing on you, you feel like it's something that you would like to speak more about. And I think even though it's something that's not the most pleasant thing, at the root of it, I think we all do want to speak about it because of its ever presence. But finding the best way that you are allowed to invite that conversation into your experience, and seeing just the bounty of love and compassion and understanding that you gain from that. And as we start to normalize this, we can start to move to a world where we're acknowledging and embracing one another for this very common experience that we've all have to endure at some point. So yeah, again, this episode was really just to get at that conversation and seeing how we can navigate around that, and the benefits that can come from that, and the core essence of what it means to have those conversations and what's within those conversations, and how much of a benefit it can be to have those conversations. So if you have any thoughts or ideas or anything I'd like to share or add about this topic, you can send those to everything.sunpodcast@gmail.com. If you have anything else, you can also join the social media pages and send messages there. Instagram, everything.sunpodcast, Twitter, @everysunpodcast, and the Facebook group, @everysunpodcast as well. I haven't been updating on there too much, but I'm going to get back on there. I'm still seeing more follows and more people joining the pages, so thank you so much for that, even if I haven't been engaging. But I love you all so much, and I am thankful for each and every one of you. So thank you so much for everything that you are. I love you all so abundantly, and I will talk to you soon.